Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. This is Stephen Lewis, and you're listening to Metaphysical Media Group. I have with me my friend and colleague, Stephen Frampton. Greetings, Steve. How are you?
I'm very well, Stephen. Very well. Looking forward to our show on Israel.
So am I. Before we get to Israel, though, in other news, we had some depressing market data. It turns out that the American second quarter gross domestic product is down further than has been projected, surprising all of the egg-headed policy wonks in Washington and the world over. No surprise there. It's only proof that economists and political scientists and so-called think tanks are working at a distinct disadvantage to we astrologers, Steve.
Well, we said that we would do a show on the New York Stock Exchange. I'm really looking forward to that one. I think it's good that we're looking at Israel this week, particularly given the chaos in the Middle East. Always chaotic, but particularly troublesome right now. And I did see the news that the first quarter was disappointing. You said second.
I did. That was a brain fart. You're exactly right.
Okay. I just wanted to check because I saw that the first quarter was disappointing. But Stephen and everyone out there, we don't need to worry about it because the U.S. economy is doing really well. Apparently, we'll continue printing cash and it'll always be okay. We don't worry about the longer term consequences. And anyway, apparently it was just because of the weather. So let's not worry.
Yes, that's what they're saying, the weather. I cast a horary figure for this question to see why, what other factors might be involved. And with and in that horary, Jupiter was in Cancer in the 8th house of investment and trade. And, I thought that really jibed also with other theories that perhaps foreign trade, foreign export figures were radically underestimated or even inflated as well. So, that combined, and they're citing the terrible weather, the extremely cold winter we had, plus a weak demand for a huge variety of products and services from American consumers, and all of these factors combined. But fortunately, the outlook does look better, according to the egg-headed policy wonks for the second quarter.
Well, I also was intrigued because I was reading that I've been following a lot what's happening with Iraq and that dreadful situation, and I was also reading that Angela Merkel, the president in Germany, now has an NSA-proof cell phone.
Ah.
Yeah. So it's got a €2,500 chip in it that prevents spying, and I thought that was just interesting, an interesting tidbit. And then also, we were talking about Iraq and the dreadful situation there with ISIS, and the latest apparently is that the Syrians, I think it was the Syrian government that bombed ISIS across the border in Iraq. And, I think that that's fascinating because we were talking about the borders in the Middle East and the fact that lines were just drawn, over a cup of tea or a brandy, draw a line on a map, and then obviously find that there are many sectarian issues. But interestingly, that the Syrian government bombed the other side of the border, and I found that very surprising because I think that that's a sign that the situation will escalate and action will be taken in Syria. And Obama has now requested $500 million to support and educate and help the moderates in Syria. And I wouldn't say I'm a Republican or a Democrat, Stephen, but I was with Hillary Clinton in the sense that we should have taken more action supporting the moderate groups in the moderate opposition in Syria, and it's woefully late to be taking action, but still we've got to do something. But you may have read as well that because of the delays selling planes to military aircraft to the Iraqi government, the Iraqis got frustrated and bought 2 planes from Putin.
Yeah.
Which I thought was just fascinating, maybe farcical. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it yet. I'll think about it more. But anyway, more controversy. Israel, how could you think of a more controversial show than to discuss the ins and outs, pros and cons of Israel and the Middle East?
Yeah, it's really important here. As always, Middle Eastern topics seem to be sort of a mediator between other larger powers such as America and Russia. We'll see that play out. It happened in Afghanistan. America gleefully got involved in the Afghanistan conflict when Russia invaded that country because we wanted some payback for for the Soviet support of the North Vietnamese in Vietnam. So a lot of and really even going back farther than that, and I'd like to say, Steve, that looking at major planetary cycles going back in history is going to really impinge and touch upon the question of Israel today, and indeed the entire Middle East, because a lot of what we're dealing with is fallout from the dissolution of the Ottoman Turkish Empire that allied themselves with Germany in World War I and lost. You made reference to borders being drawn up over a cup of tea. Well, that happened during the dissolution of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and Israel capitalized on. Well, I don't say Israel. I mean the Jews in the world diaspora. By this time, they had been organizing themselves, having Zionist congresses and things of that nature, and they really pounced on this opportunity to carve out for themselves a homeland in Israel, which was at that time known as Palestine. And interestingly enough, it was this very animated and urgent move to get a foothold in Palestine that cost the Jews dearly in World War II, because Germany, the Nazis, sought to punish European Jewry for this. They saw it as a betrayal. And they did not. It really factored into the homicidal anti-Semitism that spread like a virus throughout Europe in World War II. So we're dealing with processes that go way back here.
It was just an incredible amount of history. I have to say, I did at one point, not too long ago, several months ago, I think, I got really interested in watching documentaries and reading about Israel. And for anybody that's interested in not only history but the real dynamics, the real depth and intricacy of the Middle East, it's so important to study Israel. And I have to say, and I'm going to say various things that are supportive of the Palestinians. I'm not anti-Israeli by any means, but I like to consider both sides of the coin, both sides of the fence. So I'm going to say some things in support of the Palestinian people, but I was fascinated by the fact that you read about the history of the Jews going back hundreds and hundreds of years, a couple of thousand years, and they were never safe. If you look at Jerusalem, it was the Jews were always under attack, always under attack. They've never really been safe anywhere, and I can understand after the Holocaust this need to create a homeland for the Jews. I understand that completely. I just have concerns about how it's affected people that were living in the region and just turfing Palestinians out of their homes and really segregating them, cutting them off from the world. I don't feel that can work in the long run. I really don't. And it concerns me. And you remember, Stephen, when we were talking about Iraq, I think I made the comment that having watched a particular documentary about real extreme Zionism, because there is a group, a small group in Israel that is engaged in terrorist activity against Palestinians, and the security services in Israel were saying this is the greatest threat to the survival or the existence of Israel, because these Zionist terrorists were in effect saying that they also had a desire to destroy the two mosques, those two sacred sites in Jerusalem, and the security services were saying if they did that, that would be the greatest risk to the existence of the Israeli state. So I always feel that the Israelis have a huge responsibility in their own destiny in terms of the way they evolve, the way they conduct their affairs in the Middle East. Just a view.
Absolutely. I agree as well. And, definitely the terrorism is a coin with two sides, and it would be a mistake to think that the Israelis don't engage in terrorism. In fact, certain acts of and usually these are lone wolf types of operations. I refer you specifically to Yigal Amir, who assassinated the Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin back in the 90s. This was not a Palestinian action or an Arab action. This was a Jewish action. So, the sword cuts both ways. But let's talk a little bit about the Israeli national figure, so we can perhaps maybe understand some of the astronomical occurrences that were happening when the state of Israel came into being. Steve, shall we?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think you mentioned one thing I'd like to point out is that their son, representing not just the leadership, but also the myths of a country, and by myths I don't mean lies, so to speak, but rather legends and the sort of archetypal underpinnings of a country. We have that sun in Taurus, which itself is a very conservative sort of configuration. Taurus is famed for conservatism, and interestingly enough, if you were to set up a bi-wheel chart, which I've done and I've posted to the Metaphysical Media Group Facebook page, and if you were to set up that bi-wheel chart with the Nazi national chart, the ascendant for Nazi Germany actually conjuncts the Israeli sun, and to me this is a very powerful link and explains cosmically how the one sort of evolved due to the pressures of the other. So what I'm trying to point out here is that when we look at the national chart of any group of people, then we're only seeing that group of people at this stage of evolution right now. The Jews obviously are, as a cohesive unit, have been around for thousands upon thousands of years. The chart we're about to examine, I want to remind people, only pertains to the 1948 ratification of Israel as a state. So we're looking at at Israel where it's at right now, and not particularly talking about ancient Israel, so to speak. And that modern chart, it has a number of interesting correspondences with the Nazi Germany national figure.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? You can't, people that don't understand astrology need to understand that you find such intricate information, such incredible parallels and synchronicities between events, circumstances, people, nations,
right,
that you can't argue with it. Again, to see that this parallel between the Nazi regime, a chart there, and the Israelis' natal chart is absolutely fascinating, because it's largely why the Israeli state came into existence.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, it was through murder and criminality and racial hatred of the most loathsome sort. But if there's any bright spot in the disreputable history of Nazi Germany, it's the fact that the Jews they finally had a homeland at the end of it, and were able to at least begin to end the diaspora, their scattering throughout the world, and they have a refuge and a haven that they can go to in the event that they need to.
Yes, and interesting, though, that the sun is in Taurus, so the essence of the nation and the leadership of the nation, the government, is rigid. So, Taurus, you can say good things and more challenging things about each sign of the zodiac, and we can analyze the condition of the Taurian energy in Israel's chart. But it's the fixed Earth sign. It's this is the way it's going to be.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, and in this chart, it has very little dignity as well. The sun is peregrine here, and in fact, if you look at the planets, probably the more powerful planets are Mars and Jupiter. Mars is quite dignified, even though he's in the sign of Leo and in the terms of the malefic Saturn. However, Mars is in fairly good condition. He's got a fairly tight trine going on with Jupiter and Sagittarius. Now, it's some of the interesting factors about this chart that I think really have played out historically. Looking at Mercury in Gemini, Mercury is also very powerful in this chart. In the 8th house, we see a nation or an entity that is going to be very good at getting the finances of others, getting foreign trade, getting foreign investment, or in the case of the United States, what can only amount to charity. I know, of course, the political jargon calls it aid, but let's call a spade a spade. It's charity. That's the way I see it. And if you're the American taxpayer, you probably have a lot of other nasty words to call it. But
well, I do. I think as well, though, what's interesting, Stephen, is that you see when you look at the U.S. interests, the U.S. strategically has always felt it has an interest in supporting the Israeli state.
It has.
And having almost a friend in the Middle East, that very volatile area of the world with all of the oil and resources. But when you look at that quite fortunate Jupiter in the Israeli chart, and you look at the astrodines or the aspects, you say, well, which are the best aspects, which are the more challenging aspects? Mm-hmm. That Jupiter business, one of the two planets of business, the other one being Saturn, and it forms a trine, which is a really positive, harmonious aspect to Mars. Mm-hmm. And what is the massive chunk of the trade between Israel and the United States is arms. So you've got Jupiter, trade and abundance, spending your money, etc. A trining flowing with Mars, and anybody that looks at the glyph or the symbol for Mars, it is the masculine archetype. It's the phallus, the arrow, the missile. Yeah. So I think that alone reflects the arms trade between Israel and the United States.
Oh, without doubt. And factor in the notion that the sign of Sagittarius, which is where Jupiter is posited, is traditionally associated. Well, I say traditionally because bombs and airplanes and jets, etc., are not traditional items. They're very new in the scope of human evolution. But Sagittarius has a mundane association, and by mundane is a special astrological term referring to just earthly type of astrology, as not not associated with any particular individual. You see, so Sagittarius has mundane associations with flight, jets, bombs, and Jupiter's retrograde. So this is going to be repeated spending on these items. But let's also analyze Neptune in the 12th house. Look at the trine between Neptune and Mercury. It's partile, meaning that it's at an exact degree. They're only separated by 10 minutes from exactitude. Now, this Neptune in the 12th house is going to represent subversion. It's going to represent espionage, spying, do you see? And it's very tightly controlled. It's very tightly connected with that financial Mercury, which is very, very talented at and involved with getting finances and material support from other nations, from allies, etc. And so we see a little bit of what our quote unquote aid is going to be spent on. Subversive activities. Israel has a quite impressive history of espionage executed against its enemies and also against its friends. There are several ignoble episodes in the history of American and Israeli partnership where Israel has tangibly, physically attacked us and tried to pawn it off on this or that foe, namely the Egyptians. There's the Lavon affair in the 50s where Israeli spies attempted to sabotage American theaters and businesses in Egypt in an attempt to blame it on the Egyptians. And then there's the infuriating attack on the USS Liberty in the Mediterranean, where where Israeli jets actually strafed and put to death American servicemen. And nobody probably knows about that, and they should. Because we funnel billions of, the average African is going to get, or South American is going to get about $50 worth of American aid probably. The average Israeli citizen is going to get somewhere to the tune of $11,000 of American aid.
I think that this Neptune on retrograde Neptune in Libra, the sign of balance, harmony, or imbalances or disharmony, in the 12th house. Obviously, Neptune is the planet of vision, our dreams and visions. I know that we say generally the 11th house in the general zodiacal wheel is dreams and aspirations. But I see Neptune is involved with our vision. What's your vision for yourself? What's your vision for yourself in the world? And I think that Neptune positioned in the 12th house, which is a mysterious house, it suggests that the agenda is unclear. It's difficult to really get to the bottom of things, really difficult to understand the full dynamics of Israel. Like you said, a lot of it's just unknown. This big discussion for years, well, do they have nuclear weapons or do they not have nuclear weapons? And I think don't they call it nuclear, is it ambivalence? I'm not sure what the term is, yeah. But it's vague. Keep it vague. Perhaps we do, perhaps we don't. Perhaps we do, perhaps we don't. They clearly do. Yeah. But the vision is mysterious, and there's a lot of mystique surrounding Israel, its motivations, its involvements and actions at home and abroad, like you said.
Yeah, Neptune will definitely refer to a sort of utopian vision. And, interestingly enough, it's in the 12th house, and so Israel is not going to profit by chasing after these utopian visions. And their socialistic sort of approach to economic matters, especially in the beginning days when they were formed, it's not going to help them in the long term. And again, Neptune is also retrograde here, so this represents a repeated sort of chronic situation of delusions, being deluded about something, being deceived or deceiving, again, espionage, and a basic sort of socialistic sort of approach to finances, especially because of that trine to Mercury. And it's easy to be socialist, to have a socialistic orientation to other people's finances. Mercury's in the 8th house of trade, so Yeah,
well, I think though when it comes to finances, and you look at this chart and you say, well, here we go. We've got the major benefic, the very fortunate Jupiter in the house of finances, but then you look deeper, you dig deeper, and you look at the fact that the ruler of the house of finances in the Israeli chart, the co-ruler, is Pluto, because it has Scorpio on the cusp. Yeah. And then you invest, so you follow the trail and you go down the rabbit hole a bit further and say, well, okay, let's look at Pluto in the Israeli chart, and you've got Pluto there at 12 degrees Leo in a very, very tight square to the lunar nodes, that axis between the north node and the south node of the moon. Right. So again, in the bends, challenging, and particularly because it's Pluto, and Pluto is associated with some underhand dealings, etc. Yeah. I think that, again, there's a lot of mystery surrounding the Israeli finances, financial entanglements, and economy because of that Pluto smack bang in the bends there between the south node of the moon and the north node of the moon. And I would love us to discuss that axis, Stephen, because the south node is in the first house in this chart.
Yes, that's an unfortunate placement for the south node. And as far as I'm concerned, Pluto's position in the 10th house in Leo is really all the confirmation I need that Israel does indeed have a fairly extensive stockpile of nuclear armaments, or as our ex-President Bush would call it, nuclear armaments. little joking around.
What's the full term? Nuclear?
Yeah. Well, that's how he always said it. Nuclear.
There were always loads of books on sale about Bush's great expressions and malapropisms. Yeah. So far, they were always on sale in the UK.
I can imagine.
It was quite entertaining.
Yeah, we could call him the great communicator, but it would be the height of sarcasm. But I'm not here to criticize President Bush.
Really?
well, that's not really.
Did you?
That's not the topic of the show, unfortunately. We've got a lot of ground to cover here, but he's certainly not beyond reproach. I don't think any American president is, but
Well, I think I honestly my first statement always on presidents, Stephen, is I have to say I would always take my hat off to any person that could take that level of responsibility, that could endure the level of responsibility and stress in that job. And I'm sure that they don't always get to make the decisions they would prefer to make because it's so complex, and it's exceptionally challenging. But I don't have a high opinion of Bush, but that's just my opinion, and we don't need to go into that in detail.
Yeah, President Bush is very interesting because he projects this persona of being, this sort of intellectualized Marlboro man, when in fact his family roots come from Connecticut. They're about as he's about as countrified as JFK was. By comparison, they are only very recently involved in Texas, which they have as far as I'm concerned, a very tenuous connection to Texas. They've only been there for a couple of generations. But getting back to Israel here, I would like to talk about a couple of major planetary cycles. We're always affected by, all of us in the whole world are affected by the cycles of all the planets. So, when Jupiter is conjunct Saturn, when Pluto is conjunct Uranus, for example, this is a big deal. This represents a seed, do you see? This represents the beginning of an idea. And as the planets go through their phases, the square, the trine, the opposition, and then the incoming square, the incoming trine, and then back to conjunction again, that's the cycle. That sees the exposition of the idea. And looking at Israel, one of the better planetary cycles to analyze is that between Jupiter and Saturn, because it completes approximately every 20 years or so. So if we go back to the 1860s, where Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct on the 21st of October in 1861, we have the seed form of this idea. We have Jupiter conjunct Saturn, a belief Jupiter in a state, legal system and prosperity. And then we have the reactionary types of influences of Saturn, the conservative influences of Saturn. And Saturn, of course, is a symbol for ancient religions. It's one of the mundane symbols for the Jews, in fact. And so as this first particular Jupiter-Saturn cycle goes through its first square, we have the manifestation of the idea. This is in 1867. And by the time of that first square, the Jews become a majority in Jerusalem. This is in 1867. So we see that there's immigration to Israel even before the state is formally existing. Okay, so then we go through to the opposition in 1870. Now, by the time in any planetary cycle, by the time of the opposition, what was in seed form, the original idea, now is objectively expressed. They're standing in opposition to each other. The parent versus the defiant child. And at this time, in the 1870 opposition phase of this conjunction, there are Zionist societies. They were called the Chovevei Zion, the lovers of Zion. In Russia and Eastern Europe, they're starting to promote agricultural settlement in Israel. And indeed, this Jupiter-Saturn cycle begins in Virgo. So the idea of the idea of improving the agricultural of Palestine at that time is very, very important. So by the time the cycle returns in 1881, that old idea dies and a new one is born, this time in the fixed earth of Taurus. And at this time, during this cycle, we have the first Aliyah. Now, an Aliyah is a large-scale migration of Jews to Israel. In the synagogue, an Aliyah is when a Jew goes up to the Bina, to the place where the Torah scrolls are kept, to say blessings over the Torah. On a larger scale, it refers to a large-scale migration. And so the first of these happens by the time of the second Jupiter-Saturn cycle. Now, when the cycle begins, there's always when it begins and it's moving to the opposition, there's always an air of optimism and expansion and getting to work. This is inherent in the seed phase of any cycle. By the time we get to the first square in 1885, the term Zionism is actually coined. Okay, by the time we get to the opposition, the objective expression of this idea of, of settling the land, of having a homeland, we get influential people who are actually calling for the establishment of a cultural center in Palestine. Zionism is gathering more weight, and by the time of the incoming square of the phase, Theodor Herzl writes The Jewish State. Now, he's the founder of political Zionism, okay? And the first Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland is held not long after that. Okay, so now we get to the third Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 1901. Death of an old idea, birth of a new one. The new seed form this time focuses on Zionism and the actual settlement of Jews in Israel. Okay, by this time there have been 5 Zionist congresses, and this is going to be the year in which the Jewish National Fund is founded for the purposes of purchasing land in Israel to be the eternal possession of the Jewish people. So by the time we get to the opposition phase of this cycle, this third one, in 1910, the first kibbutz is founded. Okay, and the city of Tel Aviv is founded. This is the first purely Jewish city. Okay, very, very big deal. And seeing these things play out, we have to have respect for the overwhelming influence that these cycles have on human behavior. By the time the incoming square hits, by the time the trine hits, we have the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Then the incoming square in March 1916, there's the Sykes-Picot Agreement between, this is involving the Brits, France, and other European allies on how the Middle East ought to be divided up. Now, this is going to be a very important. This is a square. The square is always a phase of materialization and manifestation, and it's a crisis. And we're going to see how this crisis plays out later, because what we're looking at here in the square of Jupiter to Saturn in 25 March 1916 are the roots of the European Holocaust, which in turn are the roots of the foundation of the modern state of Israel, Steve.
Really interesting. Mundane astrology and cycles in mundane astrology are just incredible, and I know that that's a big area. That's one of the big research areas for our book, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And I wanted to speak to you after the show, Stephen, about some things I want to get done this week on the book, or this weekend, because it's exciting. And I love the fact that our shows give us a real opportunity to do a deep dive analysis of the dynamics in key nations and to consider the outlook. Stephen, I wanted to go back to the natal chart for Israel for a moment, because it's so fascinating. Because if you think of it, the Israeli state was created partly so that there is a homeland, that the Jews have a place where they can feel safe.
Right.
They have their own territory, their own nation, and they can protect themselves and benefit from having their own security. So you've got this huge theme of safety and of security. And if you watch some of these documentaries about about people in Israel, many of them say, we were never safe. And if we'd had our own land where we could defend ourselves, then the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. So you've got this massive concern for security, safety, and obviously we know that the Israelis live constantly with the threats from abroad, and equally you've got the reactions and policies of the Jewish state to Palestine and other areas. So it's all about Saturn. Saturn is the ruler of safety, security, authoritarianism, time, etc., structure. And as I said before, when we look at the nodal axis in the Israeli chart, we've got Saturn in the bends, which says, and if you were reading for a client, say somebody comes to your office, Stephen, and they've got this chart, you would probably say to them, look, you in life need to make sure that you're secure. You have Saturn in the bends of the axis between the north node and south node of the moon. So you need to ensure that you have safety at all times. And because of this particular dynamic in your, or this configuration in your natal chart, this is extremely important. But it's also important that you manage appropriately the archetypes of Saturn. So yes, we want to provide safety, but we don't want to be a threat to others or be overly draconian towards others, because that would be a dysfunctional expression of Saturn. And we have exactly these themes with Israel: Saturn in the bends, concerns over their own safety, but some, in my opinion, questionable practices and at times inappropriate assertion of their own authority. In my research, Stephen, I read about a young American girl who, I can't remember her name, I apologize for that, but it's been a busy week, and there's so much to absorb when it comes to research on this girl was an American girl, and she went to because some Palestinian homes were going to be bulldozed, and she stood in front of the bulldozer, or the tank, I can't remember which it was, that the Israeli bulldozer or tank that was approaching.
Rachel Corrie.
Yeah. And that tank killed her, or that bulldozer killed her, drove over her.
Yeah, she's become something of a cause celeb.
Yes, yeah, and they say, we each have a purpose in the world, and goodness, did she have one. And that's shocking. And that's of a young girl standing on her own, unarmed, not as part of a group, not threatening, not even a Palestinian, an American, and she just gets mowed down to her death by Israel. And and it makes you scratch your head and say, goodness, we're supposed to be allies. If that's how you treat a young girl from a friendly nation.
Yeah.
How do you treat the people that you consider to be a threat, and how do you express that Saturn in the bends?
Yeah, and with Saturn with Saturn contacting the nodal axis like this is going to, unfortunately, for Israel, it's going to give Saturn's activities a very public quality. And Saturn's dark side is intolerance, extremism, and isolationism. We spoke a little bit about its isolationism. I want to point out, though, that forecasting for individuals is a hell of a lot harder than for nations, because the collective, the mass, is much more fated than the individual is. The individual has a lot more free will than the mass animal does.
Yeah, I think you're right. I would say that I would put it like this, Stephen. I feel that we can understand the dynamics, the psyche of a nation, a collective entity, as easily as we can understand any other entity, even the individual that books a consultation with you and wants to know about themselves.
Right.
I think that as you intimate, the challenge with a collective entity is there are so many variables within that entity that it's almost difficult to avert the energy. So I always say to clients, astrology is like a ticking clock. The planets are moving. It's absolutely predictable. We can see where they are now. We can see where they'll be tomorrow. We can see where they will be in 2,000 years. We can see where they were in the past at pretty much any point in time that we're interested in. So it's like clockwork, very predictable, and you cannot change these energies. It's like me saying, it's going to rain tomorrow. I'm going to try and stop it from raining. Well, I have spoken to some fascinating people, and some druids in particular, who say that they can influence the weather, and I'm open-minded to that. But let's face it, if it's going to rain in my town tomorrow, there's not much hope of me as an individual actually changing that.
Right.
So, the energies will express themselves. The question, or the matter of personal influence, alchemy, or creating oneself, is influencing how the energies express themselves or how we experience the very predictable expression of the energies. So when you're talking to an individual, you can say, I mean, I've spoken to clients this week and I've said, look, this time period in August or this time period in October, you need to be on your best behavior because you've got some challenging energy, and I would want you to be really gentle and manage yourself and your life really sensibly at that time. It's not a good time to start a magic knife throwing act or, seeing if you can successfully cut yourself in half on a stage or something like that. So the energy is there. You cannot change it, but you can make good decisions and you can and project a good outlook so that the energy expresses itself in an easier fashion if it's challenging. But when you're dealing with so many variables, so many personalities of a collective entity like a nation, how on earth do you influence that? And unfortunately, we're doing this show, and I think that we're providing some really good correlations between the characteristics of a nation, the behaviors of a nation, the orientation, what's likely to be occurring in future. But is anybody out there that is actually in a position of influence listening? No. And we said Hillary Clinton was listening last week, so she will be listening again this week. But yeah. I think your point, the really important point here is, how do you influence a collective entity like a nation to, you can't sit it down and say, look, let's go through your chart, October's kind of risky, you need to be on your best behavior.
Right.
It's so difficult to manage that dynamic. But going back to this Saturn in the bends, and actually Pluto's in the bends as well, so that is even more of a shocker or an even more delicate dynamic to manage in my mind. But whenever that T-square between the lunar nodes Saturn and Pluto gets heavily impacted by a significant transiting planet, we will see the shit hit the fan. And that's where in future shows, we can really look at timings and predictions and say this is when things are likely to occur. But Stephen, if my memory serves me correctly, the solar eclipse was it the November the 3rd last year? I'm not sure if it was that one, if it was another eclipse a little later. We had 2 in April and we've got 2 in October of this year. But one of them was conjunct the South Node in the Israeli chart. That says there's a problem on the horizon.
Right, and this is where the timing. Your analogy comparing the celestial movements to a clock is really a very good one. You will not go wrong if you conceptualize these movements as a watch with a lot of minute, second, hour hands, etc. on them. And we use a variety of timing devices. The outer planets, the slower moving planets, they're going to be locked in cycles for a very, very long time. For instance, the cycles of Neptune and Pluto are about 492 years long. Uranus and Neptune have a 172-year cycle. One of the reasons I chose to analyze the Saturn-Jupiter cycle is this one has been traditionally associated with, it's all that the ancient peoples had, and they had great success forecasting with the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. And
Stephen, I think it's helpful to tell our listeners how the cycles begin. So, when the sun crosses for us in the northern hemisphere, when the sun crosses the equator from southern hemisphere to northern hemisphere,
right,
we have a new cycle beginning.
Right.
And whenever a planet is crossing the equator from southern hemisphere or southern declination, across that point of 0 to northern declination, then we've got a new cycle beginning. But because the movement of the outer planets is so slow, you get these really, really long cycles.
That's what makes it difficult. That's what makes it a tricky business, because we're not talking about one cycle. We're talking about a delicate interweaving of a great many cycles. Now, as human beings, we're quite accustomed to the idea of cycles. We have the cycle of the day. We have a week. We have a year, month, etc.
The menstrual.
We have the
right. Moonstrual cycle.
Absolutely.
The menses or the moonsies.
Absolutely, and we're all accustomed to dealing with cycle. Scientists now, modern science, they're now facing the reality and the primacy, the importance of cycles of all sorts. Cycles as they apply to the market. Cycle as they apply to animal and insectile biology. Cycles dominate the unfoldment of material and events on the Earth. And why shouldn't planetary cycles affect these things? They already affect our lives by dividing up our time, regulating our time. And so what we're doing here on this show is simply looking at larger cycles. We're asking our listeners to conceive of immense calendars instead of the mundane, ordinary calendars that we usually use. Now, we talked about the level of responsibility and action that we have. And I think you would agree with me that our mission statement here, what we do here, is to perhaps raise awareness so that we can avoid catastrophes. We can, or at least that we can be prepared for them, and we can, as a society, choose not to allow a certain tense period to cross that flashpoint and become violent or turn into a war. And as tonight's show moves on, we'll examine how some of these planetary cycles will play out in the future. We will identify future hot spots for the nation of Israel. Indeed.
I tell you, Stephen, once, I know I'm going off a little tangent, but I did a real in-depth study about Israel and Palestine, and particularly the death of the Palestinian leader. And there's still this question about who killed him, and his wife's been asking for investigations in France, etc. And when you run a synastry, a comparison between the progressed Israeli chart and his progressed chart, it's pretty obvious who killed him. Did I share that with you then?
Yes, you did a long time ago. I remember when you did that too. It was several months ago, I want to say.
There were alignments that were just unbelievable.
Yeah, and
unbelievable, if you know.
We have to consider the birth figures of the leaders of these countries as well. That's vital, because you will inevitably find correspondences, very tight and important correspondences, between the chart of a national leader and the national birth figure for that country itself. Because the leader is, I don't care if he's a dictator, I don't care if he's a Hitler, a Pol Pot, or President Obama. In all cases, the leader of a country is going to represent an expression of the collective will at that time and at that place.
Yeah, well, the whole Arafat analysis is absolutely fascinating. And what fascinates me is you never hear about Arafat anymore. That there have been all these tests and these conclusions by the Swiss scientists that polonium was involved. When do you hear about it?
It goes back.
You hear about it if you look up a good documentary on Al Jazeera, but otherwise you don't.
It goes back to the 12th house Neptune. A lot of Israel's misbehavior, and they have, every country has misbehaved, including America. But a lot of Israel's misbehavior will be protected by that Neptune in the 12th house. But Saturn, Saturn testifying, to use ancient terminology, to that nodal axis, is going to out a good deal of it. Now, looking at the Saturn again, we can see a lot of the story with Israel here, because Saturn, being in Leo, he actually rules the third house and the fourth house. The third house is your transportation infrastructure, and the fourth house is the homeland itself. And so, Saturn in Leo represents attacks on the civil apparatus of Israel, which of course makes the news constantly. There are always There have been, the PLO, Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. They're always attacking the civil apparatus of Israel. In other words, the civil infrastructure, the transportation network, the water supply, which in a desert country is a vital functioning of a healthy society. And, all of that is really wrapped up in Saturn. So naturally, Saturn, Jupiter, the movement of Saturn and Jupiter are vital for the infant state of Israel. And in fact, probably one of the more important cycles was the one that happened in 1921, 10 September 1921, another conjunction. Now, I want to make clear, when I'm talking about a Jupiter-Saturn cycle, the cycle begins when Saturn and Jupiter conjunct each other, when they're at the same degree and minute on the ecliptic. Okay, this is a conjunction, and the phases of the cycle are going to occur as the faster moving planet moves to the 90-degree position, and through all the important degree positions till it reaches opposition, and then it wanes. Now, this is the waxing phase of the cycle. The waning phase of the cycle is when the faster moving planet comes back around and conjuncts the slower moving planet again, in this case Saturn. And it's amazing to track these movements, because it's very much like watching a dance between two reluctant lovers. Sometimes they approach an aspect and then they back away as one turns retrograde. Sometimes they're reluctant, and then sometimes they're passionate, and they mingle with each other very, very, very forthrightly and urgently. Incidentally, a synonym for a planetary cycle is a synod, synod, and the Jupiter-Saturn synod in 10 September 1921 is very important for Israel, because that times out the formation. It's very close to the formation of the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, otherwise known as the Nazis. And during this cycle, we have World War II. We have the rise of European anti-Semitism and systemic annihilation of the Jews, and of course, the most positive thing of the cycle, the formation of the state of Israel. So this is a cycle that's very, very important to Israel. Very important to Israel. And I want to make it clear, all of these cycles of Jupiter and Saturn have been in Earth signs. You should see the regularity. First, it's in, when I first started tracking it, I picked it up in 1861. It was in mutable Earth, then fixed Earth, then cardinal Earth, then back to mutable Earth again, then, back to fixed Earth. The one time when Saturn and Jupiter deviated from this pattern was in the cycle from 1980 to 2000. This was in the element of air. And we call these sorts of cycles, we call these great mutation conjunctions. And it was a particularly bloody cycle for Israel. A lot of terrorist activity. During this cycle, we have the attack on the United States Marine Corps barracks in Beirut. 241 American heroes lost their lives in that. And a lot of intifada, the intifadas begin and all this good stuff. I bring this up because Jupiter and Saturn's next cycle is about to be in air again. It's going to be in 0 degrees of Aquarius. I'm expecting this to be quite tense for Israel.
I think, you look back at the different wars, and you take, for example, a comparison between one of the wars, so the 2006 Lebanon War, or one of the second Intifada. Let's take the example of the second Intifada, which is 2000 to 2005. So it was the second Palestinian uprising and the extreme violence between Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
That in 2000, you've got progressions that were peaking 2001, 2002 that were particularly conflicted, that really describe or reflect the violence. So we've got, for example, a square between Mars and Uranus. So Mars, the missile, violence, assertion, aggression, and Uranus, unpredictability, independence. A square being an obstacle or a challenge. So I think it's very useful to look at the major progressions and when they peak, Stephen. And, in 2005, we had an intense opposition by progression between Jupiter's Israel's Jupiter and Israel's Uranus, independence, etc. And that was occurring and was triggered at the same time as the Second Intifada.
Right.
It's, and you can draw these comparisons between the major progressed aspects, those deep underlying energies that peak, and the events and aggressions. I was looking at the chart and thinking, transiting Pluto in a few years will be in opposition to the progressed Sun, the very essence of Israel. And again, a few years out, we do anticipate quite a lot of turmoil and really challenging dynamics in the world. And each time we look at another nation at that point in time, we see instability. So it's going to be very interesting to look at Israel in the later part of this decade and into the 2020s.
Yes, it is. Interestingly enough, the progressed aspects and progressed charts, they're very essential in timing. When we're talking about larger cycles, and believe me, even though Jupiter and Saturn is a 20-year cycle, it's comparatively very, very brief compared to some of these other cycles. And it's a convenient way to make predictions of things, but it's the progressed aspects that time things out, and also the faster moving inner planets like the Sun, Mars, Mercury, etc. These all act sort of like the second hands or the minute hands that, when everything falls into place, the great British astrologer John Addy referred to it as the final.
Oh, I thought you were going to use my name.
Well,
I'm not great, but maybe one day I'll try.
You're too young. We're too young.
We're just babies.
Compared
we're getting old. My friend Nancy told me I was too old to go into the military. I wanted to slap her.
Hey, speak for yourself.
She's sitting right next to me listening to the show.
Hey, speak for yourself. I'm a spry, youthful 38. But
I'm 39, but I do a lot of power yoga. I think I'd be pretty fierce and I don't like to get my hands dirty though. But anyway, Stephen, there's a strong connection between a flare up in Israel, between Israel and Palestine, and Uranus by progression. That's one of the things that I see with Israel. And actually, there's a very intense opposition between we've got a little bit of debate about the exact birth time. We know the date is the 14th of May, 48, but there's a little bit of debate about, is it 4 o'clock, is it 4:37 p.m.? So we've got to take a little bit of leeway when it comes to the precision of our predictions.
Right.
But in November of 2017, or very near, probably give or take a few weeks on either side of that date, there's an intense opposition by major progressed aspect between the ascendant and the physical element of Israel and Uranus again. So there's likely to be some kind of flare up in November or towards the end of 2017. In actual fact, there is also a second progression or major progressed aspect flaring up at that time between Pluto and Uranus. That's very intense. So something will go on towards the end of 2017, and it won't be pretty.
No, it won't. We'll definitely have a lot to say about the future, the short-term future of Israel, going up to at least 2020, and there's probably going to be a lot of there are going to be some key areas that we're going to want to watch out for sure. But one good way of seeing how specific transits or progressions are going to play out in the future is to see how they've done in the past. In the 2006 Lebanon War is a good example of that. July was the summertime of 2006 was a very intense time for that war.
Well, Stephen, when did it begin? It was summer 2006, as you said, because I was just going to... the conflict starts on the 12th of July, 2006.
Right.
I wanted to progress the chart back to that date and just see what was going on, because I think that it would be good to use a specific example of a flare-up or an engagement in war for Israel, for our listeners to actually go back and say, well, look, that shows that this would happen.
The transits also show that it's going to happen. In June of 2006, in the Jupiter-Saturn cycle, Saturn is in Leo, Jupiter is in Scorpio, and in June they form an exact square. Okay, and the square was, what I want to point out is that this exact square in June involved Israel's natal Uranus in Gemini. The square was repeated again in October of that same year, and this time involving the Israeli sun in Taurus. Now, interestingly enough, in July 12th, that's when the Lebanese war starts.
Yeah.
But also right around in June, we have 5 people who die in a train collision, or in a train collision in a train that's traveling between Tel Aviv and Haifa, and 80 injuries there in June. Also, we have some political scandals.
Stephen, again, at that very moment, that day, the transiting south node of the moon was conjunct the progressed midheaven and the progressed moon in the Israeli chart. So that says some kind of very unfortunate event for the common people, and it's going to be an accident because progressed Mars was conjunct the moon.
Right.
It's absolutely fascinating. But also, you see, transiting Jupiter is conjunct the progressed south node. That's damned unfortunate in any chart.
Sure.
So the chart exactly describes what would happen.
Yeah, it does, and it's really just kind of sad. Now, in 2008 in the cycle, Jupiter and Saturn form an exact sesquisquare with each other, and this time
the Gaza war, right?
Right, and it also times out some other nasty events. We have an Israeli police raid on the Jerusalem City Hall, and this is in reference to some political scandal for Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who was eventually actually convicted, the first Israeli Prime Minister convicted of obstruction of truth or something of that nature. We have a string of different crimes. Now, I want to point out that Jupiter, in some of his nastier guises, can refer to a tendency to play God, to have a holier-than-thou type of presentation, do you see? And so, as far as I'm concerned, this sort of represents as a systemic sort of Israeli fault in many things.
Going back to the analogy of the clock, and I think of the old-fashioned alarm clocks with the bell ringing. I mean, nowadays you have your cell phone go off and it plays you some nice classical music and you wake up feeling like you're just strolling in the park. But in the past, you'd have those alarm clocks that make you feel like there's a fire, the alarm's going off in your school, get out of the building, or when the Israelis engaged in the Gaza war, which is it was a 3-week armed conflict, wasn't it, between Israel and Hamas? But the very day this transiting south node of the moon was conjunct Pluto in the Israeli chart, and that's really going back to the analogy of the alarm clock. That's when you would say, brace yourself, that thing's going to ring.
Yeah. It's about to ting-a-ling-a-ling.
Yeah, and it's not a gentle sound. It's waking up to that dreadful sound. It's just fascinating.
Well, I'm curious to see what will happen. Looking forward here a little bit, I'm curious to see what will happen once Jupiter and Saturn reach a square in August of 2015. Rather, we have some because let's see, we also have some aspects between certain of the other Saturn and other planets as well. I like to track Saturn on this because of Saturn's traditionally difficult sort of associations. And 2015 is going to be quite a busy year for Saturn. The Saturn-Jupiter contact is going to involve the Israeli. It's going to be absolutely exact with the Israeli natal Mars.
Yeah, there's something going on. You're spot on. There's definitely something going on at that time for Israel. So we're saying August 2015 because it is that month that transiting Mars triggers firstly Pluto in Israel's chart, and then it will trigger Saturn, and then it will trigger Mars itself in the chart. So there are definitely going to be guns fired or missiles deployed at that time, and also you see transiting Pluto's conjunct the part of Fortune. So I would concur with you on that one, that there's definitely something afoot, and you see the transiting nodes of the moon engage progressed Mars in Israel's chart as well. But I think it's going to be really interesting when we get to the stage where we say, okay, we know that there's something going on at a point in time. Let's now do the synergy between that nation's progressed chart and other nations nearby, and let's actually figure out, well, who's involved in the conflict or who's involved in the dispute. And I think that's where we can really add value in the longer term, because we can look at the Middle East and we can look at global dynamics, North Korea, etc., and hopefully identify not only that when there are flare-ups, but who's involved and where the risks really lie.
Yeah, there's going to be a series of rather significant transits from 2015 right on outward. We're going to have a transit of Uranus and Neptune in 2019, in May of 2019. That's going to be a semi-square. Semi-squares are similar to the 90-degree aspects in that they're aspects of manifestation. So the nature of that aspect is such that it demands an event, So that's going to be difficult. And really, the entire second half of the decade from 2010 up to 2020 is going to be very interesting to keep watch of. If I were Israel, I would definitely be on the lookout, especially regarding transportation structures. Neptune, as we've said before, is related natally in Israel to acts of subversion and espionage. So there could be some potentially embarrassing exposures, especially in 2019, 2018, because these aspects, they have a tendency to repeat themselves as the planets go retrograde. Stephen,
I think I've just spotted something really important.
Oh, what's that?
Take a look at, in October, on November the 3rd last year,
right,
there was a solar eclipse in Scorpio, and it was, I think, at 11 degrees, and I think it involved Saturn. And the south node in the Israeli chart is at 13 degrees Scorpio. And so we know that an eclipse, a powerful eclipse like that, says, look here, look at this part of your chart. There's something going on here.
Yeah.
And it gets triggered by a transit. And if I look at that chart, it was at 11 degrees. It was a solar eclipse at 11 degrees Scorpio, and Saturn, transiting Saturn, was at 13 degrees Scorpio. That is possibly one of the most sensitive spots in the Israeli chart. So that's hugely significant. But the question we need to answer is, when does that spot get triggered by another planet such as Mars? So where is Mars now? Mars is at, let me see, help me out here.
Yeah.
Where's Mars today? Let's see. If I look at today, Mars is in Libra. So Mars is in Libra now. As Mars moves up in the next several weeks, it's going to trigger that eclipse spot, Stephen. So the moment Mars gets to 11 degrees Scorpio, something unfortunate kicks off for Israel. So when is that? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, Mars is going to ingress into Scorpio in July. In very soon, in other words, it's almost July right now. and he's going to conjunct the Israeli ascendant that same exact month, obviously. And there's actually going to be another solar eclipse.
It's August. It's mid-August of this year.
Yeah.
It's around August the 15th of this year. Mars will be at 11 degrees Scorpio, that very sore spot, on August the 15th. So very close to August the 15th. There's a problem in Israel, involving Israel.
Now, the thing with eclipses is that they don't really seem to time out events like at the moment of the eclipse. They very often, at least it appears to me, signify events that happen in a distance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it's when, in my mind, what I see, Stephen, is you see where the eclipse is, and you make a note of where it occurred, and then you look for when it will get triggered by another transit, like Mars. And right now, Israel has a major progressed aspect peaking between Mars and Saturn, which is bad news, the midheaven and Saturn, which is bad news, Mercury and Saturn, which is bad news, and we've got that trigger point in August. I bet you something happens in August, middle of August.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see. It's just you get in a hurry, I hate to say. You wish you could sort of fast forward time to see how these things will.
I know, I get all excited. We're both quite excitable. Like,
yeah.
Take our Ritalin before we do our radio.
yeah, there's no doubt. Let's see what else Mars is going to do for the duration of the year. Actually,
well, tell me what you think. What do you if you progress the Israeli chart to that point? What did I say? What did I say it was? Did I say 17th of August or something? Or 15th of August. Progress the chart and put the transits on it for 15th of August and interpret it. Tell us what you think it is. Because there's something unhappy.
Yeah.
At that time.
I'm showing Mars as being progressed into 2 degrees of Libra, which is very close, maybe uncomfortably close to... is getting pretty close to... It's actually in the Israeli 12th house.
You've seen that 2 degrees Libra in August?
Yeah, August 15th, 2015?
No, 2014.
Oh.
This year. There's something afoot this year. August this year. There's a problem. Because that's when transiting Mars will trigger that eclipse point, that previous eclipse point in the Israeli chart. And that eclipse in November was conjunct the South Node in the first house in Scorpio. And so it gets triggered by Mars in August this year. So I was saying, pull that and tell us what you think it is.
Well,
what happens?
Since with the technique of secondary progressions, we only, 1 degree equals a year, then Mars will be like at 1 degree of Libra.
No, but I'm talking about the transit, Steve.
Hold on, I'm going to have to pull up the transit.
It's actually, it's a little bit earlier than the 27th. If you progress the Israeli chart with transits to the middle of August this year, you'll see what I mean, and it is not pretty.
All right. Well, hold on. Let me pull up the transit chart for that day, actually.
I'm going to progress to the 16th of August, because I think where we can be of assistance, if anyone's listening to the show, is that we can identify risks. My dream, Stephen, for us is that we're able to help people, and that applies when we see a client one-to-one. If we can help them identify a great opportunity on the horizon so that they're poised to embrace and benefit from that opportunity in time. But equally, if we see something very problematic, we can say, hey, be on your best behavior at that point in time. Don't be driving around at 120 miles an hour like Schumacher, because you could have a problem that day. That's where we can really be of value. And equally in our radio show, looking at world events, if we can identify some of these risks, then it can be helpful. Even if it just means that one person that's listening to the show decides not to go to Israel on that day,
Yeah.
Any impact we can have is important.
What we've got going on in terms of transits in August is the Sun will conjunct the natal Saturn, and this is always a typically difficult configuration for the leaders of nations.
Yeah.
And the moon is also going to be enshrined to a lot of planets in that nasty Leo stellium in the 10th house. So at the very least, there could be some scandal involved with Prime Minister Netanyahu, or God forbid, even worse. Let's hope that's not the case. But traditionally, when Saturn conjuncts the sun of a national figure, there's going to be some issue involving the leader of that country or the leadership of that country.
And you've got transiting Mars. You see it right conjunct that south node where the eclipse occurred in November. So the eclipse heralds something that's on the horizon, and then you look for when it gets triggered, and here it is.
Yeah.
And even Pluto, transiting Pluto, is conjunct the progressed moon in the third house. I wouldn't want to be on public transport in Israel on this day.
No,
or near this day.
I think the situation might be complicated a lot by the fact that Iran, which is traditionally Israel's enemy, is now trying to play ball with the international community. Their government is now straining toward compliance with the United Nations, straining to increase relations with the United States of America. So that might actually bode poorly for Israel, because Iran is going to be funding the various Shiite resistances in, for example, Iraq, in Syria, and other places like that, and that's going to have some fallout.
Did you read this week or hear this week that for the first time, I think, some force or group in Syria fired across the Israeli border? So I think it was the Golan Heights. Is it the Golan Heights that they captured from Syria in the war with Syria quite some time ago? But there was some fire. Something happened at the border, and I think a couple of Israelis were killed, and that triggered the Israelis to go across the border and actually do some bombing in Syria. And I have to say, if you think of Israel now, you think of the state of the Middle East. You've got Israel there. You've got raging civil war in Syria, absolute loss of control, extremism. Again, I am being a little bit political, but we really didn't do a lot about Syria. And we talked about John Kerry and the incident with the comment about the removal of chemical weapons from Syria, and Putin sort of pouncing on that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, we can have them do that, so you don't need to go in, don't need to do anything. And then you've got ISIS spilling across or storming across the border into northern Iraq. Iraq's in an absolute state of chaos, and literally it's civil war, isn't it? Basically, you've got Iran ready to help the Iraqis, and apparently already sending forces in from their Guard. What do they call it? The Republican Guard? Sending members of the Republican Guard through to Iraq to help out there. You've got this sort of standoff, really, this freeze between Maliki and the U.S. government, because he's obviously he's potentially not the right person to be leading the nation, but doesn't want to step down, and the Americans and British, etc., are intimating, he's not your man, think about this. And so all of a sudden he's angry that he doesn't get planes quickly enough from the United States, and the United States is not taking military action, not striking ISIS. So now we're getting 2 planes from Russians. Thank you, Russia. You helped out. You were competent. That's the suggestion. So you've got all of that going on. Then you've got the situation in Egypt, and that's really precarious. We've all got our eyes on Iraq. We've all got our eyes on Syria. We've always had a beady eye on Iran because we don't trust them. But then we're not all necessarily thinking about Egypt. We don't have Egypt at the forefront of our mind. But when I analysed Egypt some time ago, I saw great risks of civil war, full-blown civil war, or great problems on the horizon for Egypt. So potentially you got Israel surrounded by chaos, civil war, flames, absolute craziness, and then we see these risks in the Israeli chart as well. it is not a pretty picture. And it's not a pretty picture now. It's not a pretty picture in August. It's not a pretty picture in the next couple of years. And that's before we get to the end of end of this decade and into the 2020s, when we see, for example, this extremely powerful eclipse at 1 degree of Cancer, the cardinal sign. That's before we even get to that point of saying, well, what on earth does that mean for the Middle East? What does that mean for Israel, etc.?
Right.
It's not. This is scary stuff.
It is.
And I'm not trying to be a scaremonger, but let's call a spade a spade. And one of the things I've always respected about you, Stephen, is your study of medieval astrology and your appreciation of the dynamics, because there are a lot of astrologers out there or metaphysicians out there saying, oh, don't worry too much about Saturn, it's the timekeeper, it just encourages reorganization. Well, yeah, it does, but in its extreme, it means death.
Yeah, Saturn can be definitely problematic, and looking at considering the cycle chart for Jupiter in square to Saturn, that square 3 times, and the third repetition of that square will be on May the 26th, 2016, and at that time, when this happens, Pluto is going to be culminating through Israel. It's going to be at a crisis point for Israel at that time. And this is yet another piece of testimony that 2015, 2016, that this cycle, that this series of astronomical configurations is going to be significant for Israel. And also, I do expect Egypt to be involved in this. Now, you mentioned medieval astrology, turning to a technique that Ptolemy used, which it predates medieval astrology.
Our old friend. Wouldn't you love to sit down and have a cigar and a glass of wine or mead or whatever he would have drank and just sit by the fire and pick his brain?
Yeah, maybe not even a cigar, but I tell you, Ptolemy is ironically enough, Ptolemy, that luminary, that titan of the Greek Hellenistic astrological tradition, is the only ethnically Greek astrologer, on pretty much, on the academic record, as it were. But for sure, he towers over other astrologers, even probably in the modern day. He's left his Tetrabiblos is a foundational text for all astrologers. But he used the technique of primary directions, and using that now, I see that around July 4th of this year, Neptune will be using that technique of primary directions, will be directed to a square with the ascendant in Israel. On the 2nd of October of this year, Mars will be directed to a trine with the ascendant. Okay, Jupiter will be directed to a conjunction with the ascendant on December the 3rd of this year. Okay, and I expect these to be significant. But finally, we have the South Node that's going to be directed to a sextile with the ascendant on the 21st of October in 2021. Venus is going to be directed to an opposition with the ascendant on January 23rd, 2020. So these are going to be, now, this isn't X-ray technology here. This isn't an MRI. However, right around those dates, I would expect some significant occurrences to happen. And again, these travel in cycles, I want to point out. So in other words, when when Neptune is directed to that square with the ascendant on the 4th of July in this year, then this is going to time out a situation that's going to pretty much going to culminate or have its ending point on the 27th of February in 2015. For example, the trine of Saturn to the ascendant, it begins, it's directed for the 2nd of October 2014, and it's going to time out a sequence that ends in January the 11th of 2016. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens on these dates. And again, this is just one tool in a tool kit. There's a whole bunch of,
toolkit that no one uses in managing a nation or
right.
I read something again the other day about Iraq, and it was saying, oh no, nobody saw that there would be a problem in Iraq, that this would come up. And I'm thinking, well, and if you'd used an astrologer.
My thinking on the matter is that increasingly governments will. You know what? There's one document that's full of the best wisdom you could possibly get. And criticize me or not, but that document is the Bible. And there's one line in the Bible that says there's nothing new under the sun. And using these mundane techniques, astrologers have traditionally, essentially, directed the policy of monarchs.
Yes.
And maybe not so traditionally. Many a move made by Ronald Reagan was at the behest of his astrologer. It'll be like that again.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so, because honestly, it honestly breaks my heart when anybody gets hurt.
Well, I'll tell you.
When I see a lot of people getting hurt, I said to you when I read about those young guys in Iraq having their, just being told to lie in a trench, awaiting execution by ISIS, it just broke my heart. I tried not to cry, Stephen, but the temptation was to cry like Niagara Falls at that time, and it really upsets me. And so I honestly, for everybody listening, well, you're listening because you're interested in how metaphysics works, or you're interested in understanding how metaphysics can or could or should be applied to current affairs, world events, the dynamics between different nations, or you're listening because you're intrigued to understand how metaphysics can be used in your life to understand yourself, etc. It is all about creating opportunity, and that does involve addressing the problems. So people say to me, on the radio show, when you're being interviewed, you'll often talk about tragedy, you'll often talk about war, violence, and your book is about mass murder or rampage killings. Yes, but the point is that we're looking at these things, trying to find solutions, trying to suggest a way forward. And again, if it saves one life or one tragedy, one problem in a person's year, then it's worthwhile. But generally speaking, clients don't come to us to sit and have us tell them, all the wonderful things about themselves. They generally don't come because everything's hunky-dory. My life's just wonderful right now. Can you just talk me through it and confirm it? You do get clients who come regularly and they want an update or an outlook for the next month, the next few months. And I think that's very wise because it's useful to have the information. But the purpose of it is to make improvements, avoid problems. And I think that's what we're trying to do with this radio show, Metaphysical Media, because if we can pinpoint risky times for a nation, for a region, and if we can also really look at how the discord is likely to play out, then we can really have a lot of impact. We can really potentially help if people do listen. And I personally think that there should be many, many people doing this work. So as you have many, many analysts looking at national security for the United States, they should include many, many astrologers, many, many metaphysicians, potentially many, many psychics.
They will. But they won't tell about it. They won't be blunt about it, though. What'll happen is one of us will get arrested and we'll find ourselves confined in some sort of compound in Maui.
Yeah.
we'll be disappeared. It'll be sort of like an opulent Gitmo. And, hey, I'm not necessarily, as I speak right now, there's somebody calling up and their number is area code 111-111-1111. I'm like, WTF is this? Who is this calling? I'm tempted to put him on the air, but it's probably a telemarketer.
I just hope that, we're living in a time now when Neptune is back in Pisces. Neptune rules psychic ability. It's very much associated with metaphysics. And when it was in Pisces in the 1800s, there was a great interest in metaphysics. It was the heyday of seances and the heyday of mediumship, channeling. Yeah. And Neptune is back there again. Hopefully be right when we say that indicates another great surge in interest towards the power and the usefulness of metaphysics.
It was also the era in which astrology was sort of reintroduced to the to the common people and became popular again as well. And I must note that my midheaven degree is being conjuncted by Neptune right now, which I find
nice.
Yeah, I think
Here you are. My
yeah.
my progressed sun. Do you know what's fascinating as well, though, Stephen? Again, talking about relationships and synastry, because if that's the case in your chart, then my progressed sun is conjunct your midheaven, reflecting the fact that we've decided there's great value in working together, and that concoction, that combination is being stimulated by that Neptune. So we're in it together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, and this is really going to be very valuable, not just in political forecasting, also, but in help in well, I hate to say helping, but in engaging in the markets sensibly and in a sort of a comprehensive and whole-brained type of manner. Will we
be able to buy a lot of books?
Buy a lot of books? Well, I plan on buying a lot of stock. That's one.
Yeah, but I mean, its value is that it enables you to do things. So can we buy books? Can we, when we create our LLC for the consulting part of the business, can we have a little book fund?
Oh, absolutely. Are you kidding me? And the best thing is that it'll be a tax write-off, too. Thanks to Uncle Sam, it'll definitely be a tax write-off. But we're sitting here in the Middle East. We've spoken a lot about Israel, and one of the difficulties in forecasting, whether it be financial forecasting is or political forecasting, is that we have to look at external factors that are coming to bear on this matter. So we can't look at Israel in isolation. Maybe next week we can talk about Iran. Or perhaps even the PLO, or maybe we can go into maybe we can deal with something more economic in nature. It's probably not too early to think about what we're going to talk about next week.
Well, yes. What do you want to do? I think that there's so much going on in the Middle East that we need to keep our eye on the Middle East. I'm really interested in looking at the stock market, NYSE, but I liked you emailed me when I was out of town this week, and I didn't get a chance to contact you for us to talk about it, but I sent you a note saying I liked your idea and about us truly being metaphysical media. So in other words, not focusing on one subject in a show, but focusing on subjects that are pertinent at that point in time.
Right.
It means a lot more work, a lot more preparation for you and I, but I think that that's very much aligned with the original intention we had when we said, let's do this. Let's do metaphysical media.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so many topics that we're going to wind up revisiting. Of course, the Crimea, which we talked about before, is another hot topic that I think deserves a revisit pretty soon because of all of the recent developments that are happening there. President Petroshenko, if I pronounced that correctly, recently signed an agreement with the EEC and is taking definitive steps to becoming more of a player in the European community, much to the chagrin of Vladimir Putin.
Well, not only that, I can't remember this guy's name. I was going to say asshole, but that wouldn't be appropriate on a radio show, so I said guy. I'm not going to call him that. But he's an advisor to Putin. And he being interviewed, I think, by a chap from the BBC, and he called the new president of the Ukraine a Nazi. Wow. And the reporter, the journalist said, do you really think that this president of the Ukraine is a Nazi or is akin to a Nazist? Are you really saying that? Was it just a slip of the tongue? Or do you really mean it? And the guy said, yes, a Nazi. This is a representative of the Russian government and an advisor to Vladimir Putin, who is on tape. You can go on YouTube, look it up. The guy clearly says, oh, yes, he's a Nazi. And I don't see how that's constructive. I don't see how that's appropriate. And I think that this is really reflecting the dynamic that we described when we looked at the Ukraine and Russia, Stephen. So we said, yeah, it'll calm down, it'll kind of be okay for a while, but it'll kick off again later this decade, probably, and we'll look at it in more detail, we'll look out at the future in more detail, but this stinks.
Yeah, it does. The Russian representative was Sergei Lavrov,
sorry.
Yeah, that was a very irresponsible thing, and the reason it's irresponsible is because we have a proliferation of this sort of verbiage. Israel is not above doing that themselves whenever they have a new enemy.
Let's not describe each other that way.
Right.
It's not constructive to throw stones, and it's not constructive when there's a dispute to say that one party is a Nazi. That is just, that guy should be fired on the spot. I hope that Putin fires him. I'm not sure if he will. Let's see.
No, he won't. My problem with that...
I'm kind of upset about this.
My problem with that sort of language is that, you know what I mean? For one thing, it's just... it's false. You shouldn't call somebody a Nazi unless they're interning people in concentration camps and murdering them in a systematic way. Do you see? And
just using inflammatory language that words can't describe how upsetting I find this.
Right. No, it's dangerous because now, it's just that much closer, that much closer to what Angela Merkel referred to as drastic action that would be taken on the part of the EU. Now, that's a very ambiguous phrase. Does she mean, aggressive, like physical force, or is she talking about, economic sanctions?
It's economic. It's economic and diplomatic. It's purse strings. It's warfare by currency.
Yeah, it's just really a terrible situation that I think is one of the more important flashpoints in modern politics now, in the modern geopolitical situation, because Russia is, of course, allied with some major players in these Middle Eastern questions that we've been talking about and considering this evening. So what I fear the most is that aggression against Russia physically will be sort of played out on the battleground of the Middle East the way that it was done in Afghanistan back in the early 80s, where we had a situation where America took a look at what was happening, decided that it was going to support the Mujahideen, and in the early part of the 1980s, we supported them to the tune of $30 million. In a few years, we octupled that figure, and Saudi Arabia matched that dollar for dollar.
Oh, I like that word, octupled.
Yeah, we multiplied that figure by 8 times in the space of a few years. That's how dedicated we were to, fighting Russia physically using foreign soldiers. And so, and who were the losers there? Afghanistan, obviously. If you're an Afghani, if you're a citizen of Afghanistan, your lot is one of suffering and destabilization, and it's been that way ever since the late 70s. Now, in the 70s, Stephen, they were great.
I've got a little story about Afghanistan. I was flying back down to Knoxville from Pennsylvania. So I flew via Detroit, and I got talking with a girl who was working at a coffee shop. I wanted a latte. It was a long day, and I got chatting with her, and she was from Afghanistan, and she said that she goes back regularly, and I said, I'm very interested to learn more about what's gone on in Afghanistan, and I feel like it's something I need to understand better. And she started telling me about her experience of going there last year, and she said that there was a family in the neighborhood or the town that she's from. Their son was abducted by extremists.
Wow.
And they demanded money that the family couldn't produce, so they beheaded this 7-year-old boy.
Oh, my God.
These are the kinds of people that we're dealing with, or that they're dealing with.
I was going to make a smart alecky comment about how on earth, about it was a miracle that the coffee store you got your latte from had any electricity or water, given that it was in Detroit, until you. But the words "beheaded a 7-year-old boy" sort of sucked the humor out of any possible situation you could conceive of.
Horrid.
I mean, what you have to ask yourself. I mean, seriously, we can lay this at the feet of Wahhabi Islamism. Not Islam. Islam as a religion has nothing to do with this. This is the Wahhabist extremism that has emerged out of Saudi Arabia, and it's a stain on the global theocracy, on global theology, I meant to say. Wahhabi Islam is an embarrassment to Muslims worldwide, and it should be blotted out. It is awful. It is the most fundamentalist. Anytime you hear or read or witness an extremist act by a jihadist or a Muslim, it's done at the behest of Wahhabi philosophies. It's incredibly awful. Incredibly awful. It's an offense. It's an offense, and Saudi Arabia should do away with it. There's nothing godly about Wahhabist Islam. There's nothing godly at all about it.
I think that this whole situation with ISIS is very revealing because there are reports that the Saudis have actually been giving them funds. So it really, it makes you realize that no matter which way you turn in the Middle East, no matter who you try to support or how you try to involve yourself to move the situation forward, it's like today's friend is tomorrow's enemy, and yesterday's enemy is today's friend. The consideration around Iran, and it's just constantly changing, constantly crazy, constantly baffling, very interesting and troubling part of the world.
Yes, it is, and it poses a very delicate problem, and the solution to such a problem will itself be very problematic, won't it? Traditionally, the way we've been solving these problems has been woefully inadequate, because when you're dealing with a group of people who solves problems by beheading 7-year-old children, then we can't discipline these people by putting them in Guantanamo. They're not going to respond to these sort of velvety types of discipline. The response in Afghanistan, for example, our efforts to curb terrorism in Afghanistan and Iraq, they weren't quite as effective as we had wished that they would have been. And part of the reason is that I think America needs to reevaluate its entire approach to warfare, and either we need to, I don't know, maybe we just need to start evaluating perhaps Saudi Arabia, because it's clear to me that they are on the one hand posing as allies to the United States, and yet on the other hand they are underwriting our enemies. This situation cannot stand. We can't tolerate that anymore. We need to we probably need to start developing our own energy sources. We need to wean ourselves off of oil. And then
I know, but what worries me, Stephen, is the prospect of us at some point saying, do you know what, we're okay, we're energy independent, we're independent when it comes to energy, we don't need oil from other nations, so you guys just fight amongst yourselves, do what you do to each other, we're just going to live happily ever after, and we no longer give a shit because you don't have oil that we need. That worries me. I'm not saying that was your stance, but that prospect worries me, because I still come back to the fact that there's a boy that had his head cut off. There's a mother who lost her sons and a husband. The world's just terrifying.
Au contraire, I think that breaking our oil dependency will liberate us to enforce humanitarian issues with much more vigor, because part of the problem is one of our biggest allies, Saudi Arabia. And in fact, waves of jihadists, they issue forth from Saudi Arabia regularly, and we have thorny issues, for example, that you just cited, where Saudi Arabia is allegedly supporting ISIS materially. Which, if ISIS gets its hands on any more oil refineries, they won't need Saudi Arabia's material support, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be, but I think that once we establish some autonomy in the energy sectors, then we'll be much more at liberty to discipline those nations who step outside the sphere of humanitarian sensibility. Those nations that engage in humanitarian taboos. will be much more at liberty to deal with these nations in a significant, decisive way.
And I hope that we do.
So do
but my fear is that we say we've got our own energy, we're good. Sorry about what's going on over there. Good luck.
I don't see that happening because there's the UN that will mediate this, and in order.
Well, Stephen, the UN. When is the UN ever effective? When do they?
Yeah, good point.
When does the UN? I mean, honestly, I think that the concept of the United Nations is absolutely wonderful, unless it's used as a platform for a one world government, and it's some sinister intention. So if it is what we think it is, or what we say it is, rather than it being something sinister we don't quite understand, then I think it's a good intention. But the problem is it's completely it's. I mean, if it was
corrupt.
Honestly, Stephen, if you wanted to get into bed with it, you may as well take a book, because it's completely flaccid. It's an organization that's completely impotent in my mind. I think that's very sad, but it's the truth. And I know that there are some the humanitarian aid and things like that can have an impact. So it's better than nothing. But is it an effective, potent organization that really is able to address problems? No, it's a group of nations that, when it comes to important matters, vote and disagree and prevent anything from actually happening.
Yeah, and I think a large part of that, I suspect that the United Nations is thoroughly corrupt, because we've got some pretty bad people involved in it. Russia's a big member of it, so is China. And we talked during our Crimea talk of a couple months ago or whatever. We brought up the basic fact that Russia is very deeply involved with the UN. They're a sitting member. They're one of the big movers and shakers in the UN, as is America. And so, I think that there probably is some corruption there, some conflict of interest. And, I think there's also some conflict of interest with America's diplomatic association with Israel, the topic for tonight's show. I don't see how the best interests of two nations can ever coincide, and it's my strong opinion and belief that the best interests of Israel do not coincide with the best interests of the American people. And any American politician who argues otherwise is lying through his teeth and has ulterior motives, probably in the form of a check from AIPAC or whatever, that would prove the truth of the matter. And I think we definitely need to reevaluate our diplomatic ties in the Middle East. And America gets criticized for its involvement in the affairs of other countries. But if America did not involve itself in the affairs of other countries, it would probably be criticized for that as well. So I don't think this is a situation that America can really win in one way or the other. And one way, ultimately, I think when it comes to Middle Eastern affairs, America needs to be much more protective of its own interests, in the sense of, not getting involved in 10-year-long wars that produce no discernible results. Look at what's happening in Iraq. Even now we try to get out of that, and we find ourselves getting drawn back in.
And it makes you wonder, do you think, for example, Stephen, we've gone to all of this effort to remove chemical weapons from Syria, or declared chemical weapons from Syria, those that haven't been used already?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence about the fact that they have been used, and that is really upsetting. So we've removed from the Syrian government what was left and what was declared as remaining or there. But now you've got ISIS trotting around in northern Iraq, potentially scooping up whatever they had knocking around.
Yeah, they're a serious problem. They've taken up, they've conquered huge swaths of that country. And like you said, Maliki doesn't want to step aside. He should step aside. He's been ineptly handling the situation, and we've been constantly talking about August, 2014 through 2020, 2022, etc. Being a sort of a string of difficult years, And I'm sure we're going to start seeing some of our predictions being validated. And those predictions are going to come in sharper focus as the weeks go on, and metaphysical media.
Just wanted to make something clear, Stephen. As your business partner, we're going to create an LLC together. I'm not going to vote yes on any stock market investments until we've had our NYSE show.
Oh yeah. Nor am I.
I want to see what's going to happen to that sucker before we do anything with it. Ourselves. So did we decide what we're doing next week? I'm not sure we did. I think I took us off on a tangent, but it was a very interesting one.
We haven't. Frankly, I'm not quite sure what I'm sure we can decide within the next couple of days and let people know through Facebook or whatever. Or of course, if you're one of our 7 billion dedicated listeners, you can
7 billion.
Yeah, well, which pretty much includes everyone, even people in countries that don't even have internet hardly. So
I mean, I think we're just starting out at the moment. The listeners are. I listen to the show to check it. Nancy listens to it next to me. You listen to it to check it. Hillary Clinton listens to check it. That's what, 5?
Yeah.
So we're not doing badly.
No, we're definitely not doing it. I think the entire population of Sierra Leone also listens in faithfully, as well as the Greek island of Corfu.
Yeah, and the whole of Anglesey.
Right. And I think an isolated county in northwest Idaho also listens to our work faithfully every single Thursday. So you can just Friday. You can just show up next Friday, and you're guaranteed to get an interesting time, 2 hours worth of philosophy, metaphysics, and stimulating predictions, and
you'll never hear a Russian politician called an asshole. Always a guy.
Always a guy, but we'll implicate strenuously that he is one. However, especially if he is irresponsible enough to refer to someone else as a Nazi, right?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see if he keeps his job. Shame on Putin if he does.
Shame on Putin. Now, meanwhile, if you're frothing at the mouth and can't wait for next Friday to get here, and I can't blame you, you can always visit Stephen Frampton at stephenframpton.com and order a copy of his book, Thinking Completely Outside the Box. And you can also visit me at thegingerpsychic.com. I've been busy with my roster of clients here lately, and I haven't authored any new fascinating articles, but that's about to change. And if you haven't read any of my articles, there are a whole bunch of them there. You can also find us on Thursday nights at psychicaccesstalkradio.com, another stimulating venue for all things relating to metaphysics, where we also share the airwaves with Maureen Holleran, a gifted psychic, and also Nona. So please don't miss out on that opportunity as well. And we just love what we do. And again, as the weeks go on, we're going to sharpen our focus on what we think is going to happen in some of these problem areas that we have isolated, 2015, 2016. The picture is going to be coming into focus. Don't miss out. Am I right or am I right?
You're right.
I love hearing that. It's
in my job description, it's on my partnership description, isn't it? No, we don't have this yet.
It's our business to know things, and really, I want to impress upon you the depth to which we go here to really form pictures of future happenings for nations and individuals. We're not just looking at one chart; we're looking at a variety of cycle charts. We're looking at a variety of lunation charts. We're looking at progressions. We're looking at a lot of things because these astronomical events, they don't just affect Israel or Iraq or Afghanistan. The Jupiter conjunction with Saturn or this or that or the other, this is a mundane feature that affects all of us. And it'll affect all of us differently. And you have to look at the full spectrum of occurrences astrologically and astronomically in order to understand or to begin to understand what's happening. It's very important to do that. And you know what we should do, Steve? We should actually, to really firm up the basis for our forecast, we should start looking at history to demonstrate, on the air here, to demonstrate, how astrology can predict the outbreak of war. For example, World War II, some of Britain's finest astrologers, they actually made a famous prediction of no war happening based on a couple of charts because at the time there were some modern techniques that they didn't have under their belt.
They didn't have the technology that we have. I mean, let's be honest. We've got the touch of a button. We can generate all manner of information that that we can then interpret, whereas they had to toil for a long, long time just to get a chart together, didn't they?
Yeah, they
never mind
had
progressing it.
They had to do actual real math.
Gosh.
Compared to, and I'm talking.
Sure, they would have had a calculator, wouldn't they? Did they have Excel?
Oh God, no.
At least
they had like an abacus.
Damn.
They had their.
They probably had those ringing bell alarm clocks as well that we talked about.
I mean, this is the era of God. What's that dude's name? The modern father of computer science. Christ, his name evades me now. He was actually jailed in Britain for homosexuality.
Bill Gates.
No, not Bill Gates. Oh my God, I should be ashamed of myself for not being able to remember his name. This is really let's see if I can look it up. I want to say Alan Turing. Alan Turing.
Oh, the original Apple logo guy.
Yeah, Alan Turing.
Yeah, because it was the gay, it was the colours of the gay flag or whatever, wasn't it?
Yeah,
he was
a brilliant, a genius actually, probably the father of modern computer science, mathematician, and jailed for his sexual lifestyle. But this was back in a more primitive era when we had less progressive social.
We're not free to do whatever we want in the US. And I say we, I'm not referring to you, Stephen. You're as straight as a slide rule. But
right.
but I'm gay, and I was going to say, well, we're free to do what we want in the West, at least, or the United States and other countries. But actually, we're not, because I can't necessarily get married. And the other thing, well, the more important point I was going to make is that there are countries in which I could be executed.
Iran.
So we're in relatively good shape here, but we're far more fortunate than others. And what breaks my heart is that there's such tragedy, such cruelty in other parts of the world. Hopefully we can. I would like us to maybe donate some of our business proceeds in future to a good cause. Not that cause necessarily, but just something we believe in.
I've got no problem with that whatsoever. Why not? If I'm going to line my pockets on the market using astrological trading techniques, I've already resolved to donate heavily to various charities. Not so much. I've got sort of a problem with organized charities sometimes. Mm-hmm. I like them a lot. Don't get me wrong, but I really like to donate my time and my money, to local communities, not necessarily my own, but to local communities. Oh, I got a great idea. One topic we should look into is Detroit. I sort of quipped about, seeing Detroit in front of Walmart. Yeah, seeing Detroit in front of Walmart the other day with a "Will Work for Food" sign. Detroit, we like to joke about Detroit here in America, but let's face it, we should not turn our backs on that city. It's an American city, for Christ's sake.
It's bankrupt, isn't it?
It's bankrupt, or it's applied for bankruptcy. It's filing bankruptcy. But
there are 2 or 3 cities or towns in California that were applying for bankruptcy as well.
Yeah, Detroit's in trouble, and Detroit is the seat, it's the home of the American auto industry, and by default, it's the home of the global auto industry.
Well, surely they'll be busy taking back all of those Fords.
Yeah, they'll be busy trying to figure out a way to pay pension and retirement for the city employees who faithfully labored for that municipality all these years. They're in a lot of trouble.
This is going to become a big issue for everybody, because I was reading that, I'm not sure it's true. I'm not sure I think it's part of a smokescreen, potentially. I don't know enough about it yet, but there are reports that Social Security is going bust, basically. There isn't enough money, and there won't be state retirement for people and things like that. But I'm not sure that we're given the correct.
Yeah, that's always been a big fear for Americans, and we've even had often during election seasons we'll have politicians to come up with the innovative ideas of doing something with the Social Security Fund in terms of maybe investing it or using it on the market to sort of make it a little bit more robust and a little bit more viable. But it'll be interesting also to look into the future of Social Security. So we'll definitely have something interesting for you guys next week. We're coming to the final minute of our show ticking down here. Don't forget to visit Stephen Frampton at StephenFrampton.com. That's Stephen with a V. Frampton, F-A-R-A-M as in Mary, P-T-O-N. And you can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. Visit our Facebook page, Metaphysical Media Group. Give it a like. And definitely we'll see you here next week. Got anything else you'd like to add, Steve?
No, just please tell people about the show. Share it on Facebook, whether it's the archives or the upcoming shows. Help us get 7 billion people.
Awesome. Well, you guys have a great week. Be good to each other, and we will see you next Friday.